My wife resented me for bringing my ex-con brother back home. When I opened the front door with Daniel by my side, I braced for the inevitable storm. It had been years since my older brother had seen freedom. And bringing him back home felt like the right thing to do. But the second Sarah saw him, her face darkened with anger. "You didn't even ask me," she hissed, her voice trembling with frustration. "You think this is a small decision?" Her words hit me like a hammer, but before I could respond, Lily and Ben burst into the room, their joy lighting up the tense atmosphere. "Uncle Daniel," they squealed, running to hug him. Daniel knelt to embrace them, his smile softening the hardened edges of his face. Their excitement was a sharp contrast to Sarah's icy demeanor. She stood rigid, arms crossed, her eyes darting between Daniel and me as if demanding an explanation. I could feel the divide growing, her hostility filling the space where joy should have been. Watching the kids chatter excitedly with their uncle, I realized how deeply this decision had already fractured our family. It was only the beginning, but the tension was palpable, threatening to crack our fragile home apart. Growing up, Daniel was more than just my older brother. He was my protector, my best friend, the one constant in a world that often felt uncertain. He shielded me from bullies, taught me how to throw a football, and was the first to cheer me on at every life milestone. His presence was larger than life, and I idolized him. But as we grew older, cracks began to form in the person I thought he was. Daniel, the man I had trusted implicitly, made choices that led him down a path I never saw coming. I still remember the day I found out about his crime. It felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath me. Daniel had embezzled money from his company, desperate to pay off gambling debts that spiraled out of control. The man who had always been my hero was now branded a criminal. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it rippled through our family, leaving scars I'm not sure will ever fully heal. Sarah had been particularly devastated. When Daniel had come to us for help, claiming he was drowning in debt, we lent him money our hard-earned savings meant for Lily and Ben's future. He swore it would fix everything, that he'd repay us as soon as he could. But when the truth came out, that he had stolen from his company even after taking our money, Sarah's fury was uncontainable. "He lied to us, Michael," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "He used us." Her anger wasn't just about the money. It was the betrayal, the broken trust, the fear that my loyalty to Daniel would continue to harm our family. And in many ways, she was right. I knew what Daniel had done was unforgivable, but he was still my brother. That bond was something I couldn't just sever, no matter how deep the betrayal ran. It was a conflict that simmered for years, lingering in every conversation about him, every tense moment when his name came up. Now, as I stood in our living room, watching Sarah's icy glare and my children's jubilant reunion with their uncle, I couldn't help but feel the weight of our family's fractured history. Daniel had been my hero once, but the choices he made had turned him into a source of pain and division. And yet, he was still my brother, and I wasn't ready to give up on him, not yet. The air in the house was thick with tension, a fragile silence punctuated by the occasional passive-aggressive remark from Sarah. She refused to address Daniel directly, her disdain evident in every cold glance and muttered comment under her breath. When Daniel offered to help clear the dinner table, Sarah's curt, "No need. I've got it," carried a sharpness that made even the kids glance uneasily between the adults. Daniel, to his credit, seemed determined to prove himself. He spent mornings fixing the leaky faucet Sarah had been complaining about for months and afternoons playing with Lily and Ben in the backyard, their laughter momentarily cutting through the awkward atmosphere. He was trying, anyone could see that. But Sarah remained unmoved, her skepticism like a wall he couldn't breach. "I don't get it," I finally said one evening, unable to hold back any longer. "He's doing everything he can to show he's changed. Can't you just give him a chance?" Sarah turned to me, her expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. "A chance? Michael, trust isn't a gift you hand out like candy. It's earned. And after what he did to us, to you he hasn't earned anything." Her words stung, but deep down, I knew this wasn't a battle I could win in a single conversation. The divide between my wife and my brother was a chasm neither seemed willing to cross. Daniel quickly became a hero in Lily and Ben's eyes. He had a knack for turning mundane moments into adventures, weaving tales of his youth that left them wide-eyed and giggling. He played board games with them for hours, never tiring of their endless enthusiasm. When Ben needed help with a school project, Daniel jumped in without hesitation, his patience and creativity shining through. To the kids, he was the cool, caring uncle they'd always dreamed of. But Sarah saw things differently. She watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed and her lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't think it's dangerous?" she finally asked me one evening. "Having someone like him around the kids?" I frowned, her words settling uneasily in my chest. "Someone like him? He's their uncle. He's trying." "Trying isn't enough, Michael," she countered, her voice low but firm. "You can't erase what he's done. What if he slips up again? What if the kids think his mistakes are excusable?" Her concern planted a seed of doubt in my mind, one I couldn't easily shake. I wanted to believe in Daniel, but Sarah's fears loomed, casting shadows over every moment of joy he shared with our children. Finding a job for Daniel was like navigating a maze with no exit. His criminal record shadowed every application, every interview. Despite his genuine attempts to rebuild his life, employers closed their doors as soon as his past came to light. Day after day, Daniel returned home defeated, and I could see the weight of his circumstances bearing down on him. I did my best to support him, but the situation began to strain our household. Sarah's patience, already thin, frayed further. She kept a close eye on our dwindling finances, her frustrations bubbling over into sharp remarks. "How long are we supposed to support him, Michael? We have bills to pay, a family to think about." I tried to reason with her. "He's trying, Sarah. He's not sitting around doing nothing. You see that?" Her glare cut through me. "Trying doesn't pay the mortgage," she snapped. "This isn't the life I agreed to. If he can't find somewhere else to go, I'm taking the kids. And we're leaving." Her ultimatum was a thunderclap in the quiet tension of our home. I stood frozen, torn between my loyalty to my brother and my commitment to my wife and children. The walls seemed to close in, and I realized there was no easy way forward. The weight of Sarah's words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I questioned whether I could hold everything together. Dinner began in fragile silence, the kind that cracks under the slightest pressure. The table was set, the food warm, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. Daniel, sitting quietly, kept his movements deliberate, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of tension in the room. Lily and Ben chatted about their day, their laughter the only sound breaking through the thick air. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her smile forced, her eyes flickering to Daniel every few moments, a barely concealed storm brewing behind them. Daniel leaned forward to pass a dish to Ben, his hands trembling slightly. In his effort, his elbow grazed a glass of water, sending it tipping over. The clear liquid spread across the pristine tablecloth, soaking into the fabric and dripping onto the floor. Daniel immediately reached for a napkin, his face flushing red with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly, his voice barely audible. Sarah's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly, the sound sharp and jarring. "Of course," she said, her tone laced with a frustration that had been simmering for weeks. "Another mess. That's what this has been since he came here, one disruption after another." "Sarah," I said, my voice low but warning. She ignored me, her attention fixed on Daniel like a laser. "It's not just about the spill, Daniel," she continued, her voice rising. "It's about everything. You've turned this house upside down, and I'm the only one who seems to notice." Daniel's hands froze mid-cleanup, his face a mix of shame and hurt. "I didn't mean." "It doesn't matter what you meant," Sarah snapped, cutting him off. Her voice was steady now, but her words struck with precision. "What matters is the effect you've had. This isn't your home, Daniel. You don't belong here. That's enough." My voice was louder than I intended, and the sudden force of it silenced everyone. The kids stopped chewing, their wide eyes darting between their mother and me. Daniel looked down, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if bracing himself for the next blow. "Enough." Sarah turned to me, incredulous. "You think this is enough? Michael, you've been blind to what's happening. You're so busy protecting him that you've forgotten who your real family is." "I haven't forgotten anything." I said, my voice calmer now but firm. I see everything, Sarah. I see a man trying to rebuild his life. I see someone who's working hard to prove he's changed. And I see you. Refusing to give him even the smallest chance. Sarah's laugh was bitter, almost hollow. A chance. You think a chance erases what he's done? You think a chance makes up for the lies? The betrayal, the chaos he's brought into our lives? Michael, wake up. You're putting him above us, above your wife and your children. Her words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. I wanted to argue, to counter her claims, but the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't just anger, it was hurt, a deep wound that my actions or lack thereof had only made worse. The kids sat frozen, their plates untouched. Daniel rose from his seat, his voice quiet but steady. I think I should go to my room, he said, excusing himself. He didn't look at anyone as he walked away. His steps heavy with the weight of the argument. Sarah didn't move, her eyes fixed on me now, her hands gripping the back of her chair. When does this end, Michael? She asked. Her voice softer but no less sharp. When does our family get to come first again? I didn't have an answer, and the silence that followed was louder than any words could have been. The dinner, once warm and inviting, had turned cold, its warmth drained by the argument that left no one unscathed. Late one evening, as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, Daniel approached me in the dimly lit kitchen. His face was lined with exhaustion, his shoulders heavy with unspoken remorse. Without prompting, he began to speak, his words measured and burdened with regret. He admitted to understanding Sarah's resentment, acknowledging the weight of his past decisions and the impact they'd had on everyone around him. There was no attempt to justify his actions. No plea for sympathy, just a raw, honest confession. He knew the damage he'd caused, and the shame of it seemed to hang over him like a shadow he couldn't escape. The next morning, Daniel's efforts to make amends became evident. With the last of his savings, he purchased small but thoughtful gifts for Lily and Ben. They were simple tokens: a book for Lily, who loved to read, and a puzzle for Ben, who thrived on solving challenges. When he presented them, the children's faces lit up with pure joy. They clung to their uncle, their laughter filling the room in a way that felt almost like a salve for the tension that had plagued the house. Watching them, I saw a glimmer of the man Daniel had once been: the protector, the brother who had always tried to do right, even when life had pushed him toward the wrong. His actions were small steps, but they were steps nonetheless, and they carried a sincerity that couldn't be denied. Still, I couldn't ignore the storm brewing beneath the surface, knowing that his gestures might not be enough to bridge the gap between him and Sarah. One afternoon, as I sat at the dining table sorting through bills, Lily and Ben approached Sarah with a folded piece of paper clutched tightly in their hands. Their eyes, wide with determination, held a seriousness that seemed beyond their years. They had written a note, scrawled in their uneven handwriting, pouring their hearts onto the page. It was a simple plea for understanding. A childlike but profound expression of their love for Uncle Daniel. They described the joy he brought into their lives, the stories he told, the games he played, the way he made them laugh when the days felt too long. Sarah read the note in silence, her expression unreadable at first. But as her eyes scanned the lines, something shifted. Her rigid demeanor softened, and for a moment, the tension that had gripped our household seemed to loosen. She stood quietly by the window, staring out as the children played in the yard, Daniel among them, his laughter mingling with theirs. The sight was a stark contrast to the bitterness that had settled between us, a glimpse of the warmth we had almost forgotten. Sarah's thoughts were her own, but I could see her wrestling with them. The note from Lily and Ben had struck a chord, breaking through the wall she had built around her resentment. Though she didn't say anything, the way she lingered near the window, her gaze steady, hinted at the possibility of change. For the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of hope that perhaps the fracture in our family could begin to heal. It was a normal weekday when the call came. Ben had been hurt at school. The words felt like a sharp jolt to my chest, and before I could process what to do, Daniel was already grabbing his keys. His urgency was instinctive, his movements swift and sure as he muttered, "I'll drive." We reached the school to find Ben sitting in the nurse's office, a small cut on his forehead and tears streaming down his face. Daniel crouched down, meeting Ben's gaze, his voice steady and soothing as he reassured him. "You're okay, buddy," he said softly, his hands working carefully to hold an ice pack against Ben's head. Ben clung to him like a lifeline, and for a moment, it was as if all the tension in our household didn't exist. Sarah arrived shortly after, her face pale with worry. She froze when she saw Daniel holding Ben. Their bond clear in the way Ben nestled into his uncle's arms. I watched her hesitation, the conflict in her eyes as she processed the scene. Daniel's care was undeniable, calm, patient, and entirely selfless. Later at home, as Ben rested on the couch, Sarah lingered near the doorway, watching Daniel. He had stayed by Ben's side, ensuring he had everything he needed. His attention unwavering. For the first time, there was no passive aggressiveness in Sarah's gaze, no sharp edge in her tone when she finally spoke, barely audible, "Thank you." Her words hung in the air, not quite an apology but a step toward something less combative. I caught the flicker of recognition in her expression, the realization that Daniel's presence wasn't the threat she had once believed. His actions had spoken louder than any argument, proving his genuine care for our family. That evening, the household felt different. The walls that had seemed to echo with tension for weeks now carried a quieter atmosphere. Sarah wasn't ready to let go of all her doubts, but the shift in her demeanor was undeniable. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first crack in the armor she had built around her resentment. Watching her sit quietly at the table, her eyes occasionally drifting to Daniel and Ben laughing together, I allowed myself to hope. Sometimes, moments of crisis reveal truths we've been unwilling to see. And perhaps this was one of them. For the first time, I felt the possibility of peace creeping into the spaces where conflict once thrived. The house was quieter than it had been in weeks, though the atmosphere remained tense. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her posture rigid, her focus fixed on her tea. Her silence spoke volumes, a tentative acceptance of the decision we had reached. Daniel would stay, but only temporarily, and under strict conditions. It was a fragile understanding, and I knew the responsibility rested heavily on me to ensure it worked. In the days that followed, the balance within the household shifted cautiously. Daniel, aware of the precariousness of his position, stayed in the background, except when spending time with Lily and Ben. The children's laughter filled the air as they played with their uncle, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents of tension. Daniel's efforts to secure employment consumed much of his time. And after a string of rejections, he finally found a part-time job at a local auto shop. The relief on his face when he shared the news was unmistakable, a small but vital step toward rebuilding his life. The job brought tangible changes. Financial pressures eased slightly, and Daniel's absence during work hours provided Sarah with some peace. She began to notice his contributions, though her acknowledgement was cautious and restrained. Gradually, her interactions with him softened, her sharp edges dulled by his consistent efforts to prove himself. In the evenings, Daniel helped the kids with projects, like constructing a model airplane. Their excitement was infectious, and even Sarah couldn't entirely hide her approval, though she remained guarded. Her demeanor signaled a subtle shift in acknowledgement that Daniel was making an effort to change. The household settled into an uneasy but manageable rhythm. Sarah's reservations lingered, but there was progress, however slow. It wasn't forgiveness, nor was it full acceptance, but it was a step forward, a small opening for healing in a fractured family dynamic. The promise of a new beginning hovered on the horizon, fragile yet full of potential. The house seemed quieter now, the echoes of past arguments fading into the background. Sitting on the porch one evening, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The past weeks had been turbulent, full of raw emotions and unexpected turns, but they had also been a mirror, forcing me to confront the fragility of family bonds. Despite the pain and frustration, I knew that family was worth fighting for, even when it felt like we were fighting against each other. Daniel's return had tested us all. It had unearthed old wounds, shaken trust, and exposed vulnerabilities. But beneath the surface of conflict, there was also resilience. Sarah's resistance, though fierce, stemmed from her desire to protect our family. Daniel's efforts to prove himself, though imperfect, revealed his sincerity. And through it all, Lily and Ben remained a constant reminder of what truly mattered: the possibility of creating a better future, however imperfect the present. When the day came for our first family outing since Daniel's return, I wasn't sure how it would unfold. Sarah's guarded demeanor and Daniel's cautious optimism set the tone as we packed the car and drove to the park. The kids, oblivious to the undercurrents, chattered excitedly about the picnic, their joy infectious. Watching Daniel help Ben fly a kite while Sarah set up the picnic blanket, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't allowed myself to hope for: peace. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was a start. The boundaries Sarah had set remained intact, and Daniel respected them without question. The laughter of Lily and Ben filled the air, bridging the gaps that had once felt insurmountable. Sarah's smile, faint but genuine, as she watched her children play, was enough to make me believe in the possibility of healing. As I sat under the shade of a tree, watching my family come together despite everything, I felt a surge of quiet gratitude. The road ahead would be long, and not every day would be easy. But for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that we could find a way forward. Rebuilding relationships wouldn't erase the pain, but it could create something new: a family that, though bruised, was united by its willingness to try again.